What if I told you that half of what you think you know about ancient history is wrong, not outdated, not incomplete, wrong? That dramatic story about Romans slaughtering Britons at Maiden Castle never happened. The idea that the Maya civilization collapsed overnight is complete fiction. The theory that Ice Age Europeans discovered America is genetically impossible. 2025 was a brutal year for comfortable myths. DNA analysis, radiocarbon dating, and actual archaeological evidence destroyed narratives that had survived in textbooks, documentaries, and museum displays for decades. Today we're examining 10 popular beliefs about the ancient world that were definitively disproven this year, and what the real story turns out to be. Some of these will surprise you. Others might fundamentally change how you understand human history. This is Discovery Journals. Let's separate fact from fiction. Myth number 1: the Göbekli Tepe conspiracy. We begin with one of the strangest controversies to explode across social media this year: the claim that archaeologists were deliberately hiding Göbekli Tepe by planting olive trees on top of it. The narrative went viral. Hundreds of trees had been intentionally planted on the 12,000-year-old site to prevent excavation and conceal what mainstream archaeology did not want revealed. Some versions connected it to the World Economic Forum conspiracies. Alternative archaeology channels amplified the story to millions of viewers. Here is what actually happened. The trees were planted around from 2004 to 2005 by the landowners, before the Turkish government even acquired the property for archaeological research. The former owners confirmed this publicly. There was no conspiracy, just farmers planting olive trees on their own land. But the myth persisted. Only viral videos had forced officials to remove the trees and save the site from archaeological suppression. Except archaeologists had been planning tree removal for years. The site management plan, publicly available on UNESCO's website since 2016, explicitly states, the trees planted recently in the first-degree archaeological site, which damages the archaeological elements, shall be uprooted by the Excavation Directorate and planted in different areas. The decision date was February 23, 2016. The 2017 supplement lists removal of olive trees, noting the impact of roots on unexcavated archaeological heritage as a long-term conservation priority. In early 2025, Turkish officials relocated the trees exactly as planned. The timing had nothing to do with social media pressure. Conservation teams were waiting for the right season to transplant safely without destabilizing the soil. The final evidence came in October 2025, when geomagnetic surveys, ground-penetrating radar and LiDAR scans of areas formerly covered by trees revealed intact structures beneath the surface. They revealed clear outlines of circular enclosures and rectangular buildings with no significant damage. Olive roots do not penetrate deep. The structures were fine. What looked like a dramatic expose turned out to be routine conservation planning following established UNESCO protocols. Myth busted. Nobody was hiding Göbekli Tepe. Archaeologists were doing their jobs. Myth number 2. Ice Age Europeans discovered America. For decades, the Solutrean hypothesis claimed that Ice Age Europeans crossed the Atlantic around 20,000 years ago, bringing stone tool technology that became the foundation for Clovis culture in North America. It is a compelling story that persisted in alternative archaeology circles, appealing to those who wanted European discovery of America to predate Native American arrival by thousands of years. In 2025, science delivered the death blow. Two massive genetic studies published in Science and Nature examined genomes from over 1,500 individuals across northern Eurasia and the Americas. The results were unambiguous. Founding populations of the Americas trace back to North and East Asia, not Europe. The divergence dates align perfectly with Beringian migration, and there is not even a statistical whisper of Ice Age European ancestry. If Solutrean migration had occurred, we would see genetic signatures, but the studies found none. The Nature paper examined ancient individuals from central Argentina, one of the most genetically isolated populations ever sampled, a time capsule preserved for 8,000 years. Even there, ancestry traces exclusively to Asian-derived founding groups, no European signal whatsoever. Together, these studies confirm what archaeologists have maintained for years. The first Americans came from Asia via Beringia, not from Europe via the Atlantic. The Solutrean hypothesis is not just unlikely, it is genetically untenable. The 2025 data make it scientifically impossible. Myth busted. There was no Ice Age European colonization of the Americas. Myth number 3. Cleopatra's sister's skull. In 2009, a BBC documentary titled Cleopatra, Portrait of a Killer, made international headlines by claiming a skeleton found in the octagon tomb at Ephesus belonged to Cleopatra's younger sister, Arsinoe IV. The program analyzed the skull's features and suggested they indicated African ancestry. That single claim raced through media for over a decade, eventually being cited as evidence in debates about Cleopatra's own ethnic background. The problem? It was completely wrong. In 2025, a study published in Scientific Reports re-examined the remains using modern methods: morphological analysis, contextual archaeology, radiocarbon dating, and ancient DNA extraction. The results appended everything. The skull does not belong to Arsinoe IV. It does not belong to a woman at all. The remains come from a single individual, a boy approximately 11 to 14 years old. His genetic ancestry signature points toward the Italian peninsula, or Sardinia, not North Africa, and certainly not the Macedonian Egyptian heritage associated with Ptolemaic royalty. The entire chain of assumptions connecting this skeleton to Cleopatra's family collapsed under scrutiny. The Austrian Academy of Sciences summarized the findings succinctly. Cleopatra's sister remains missing. Whatever Cleopatra's actual ancestry may have been, and that remains a complex question involving Macedonian Greek, possible Persian, and potential Egyptian heritage, this particular skull tells us absolutely nothing about it. A decade of media coverage, online arguments, and academic citations was based on a fundamental misidentification. Myth busted. The Ephesus skeleton is not Arsinoe, not female, and reveals nothing about Cleopatra's ancestry. Myth number 4. The Maya civilization collapsed overnight. One of the most persistent myths in archaeology is that Maya cities collapsed simultaneously around 900 CE in a single dramatic catastrophe. Major centers were abandoned, kingdoms were destroyed, populations vanished into the jungle. It is a powerful narrative that still dominates documentaries and social media. 2025 brought 3 major studies that should finally end this misconception. A paper in radiocarbon used Bayesian modeling to analyze settlement dates across east-central Belize. The results showed that different communities experienced change on vastly different timelines. Some centers were reorganizing while others expanded. There is no single collapse that fits the entire Maya world. A climate study examined the connection between major droughts and political instability. Yes, severe droughts occurred. Yes, they coincided with upheaval. But critically, these droughts affected different regions at different times with varying severity. Some areas were devastated. Others weathered the conditions. Environmental stress was real, but staggered, not synchronized. A study in Current Biology analyzed ancient DNA from Maya individuals spanning the Classic period, from 600 to 900 CE. Populations did not vanish suddenly. There were demographic declines, some dramatic, some gradual, but also clear evidence of continuity. Lineages persisted through the so-called collapse. People adapted and migrated. When you synthesize genetics, settlement chronologies, and climate data, the picture becomes clear. The collapse was not one moment of disaster, it was a centuries-long process of political fragmentation, environmental challenges, demographic shifts, migration, and cultural transformation. Some cities fell. Others persisted for centuries. Some traditions declined. Others evolved into the post-classic Maya world that Spanish conquistadors would eventually encounter. Myth busted. There was no sudden synchronized Maya collapse. The transformation was complex, regionally variable, and took centuries. Myth number 5. The Band of Holes was built by aliens. One of Peru's most visually striking archaeological sites is Monte Sierpe, known as the Band of Holes, over 5,000 small pits carved into a ridge in the Pisco Valley. For years, the site has been a magnet for fringe theories. Alternative archaeology channels claimed the pits formed an alien runway or were created by technologically advanced lost civilizations. The mystery was irresistible until 2025 provided the answer. Researchers using drone mapping, sediment analysis, and microbotanical sampling published a study revealing the Band of Holes was an indigenous accounting and storage system linked to local trade networks. These were orderly, functional features built by communities who lived and traded in the region long before the Inca Empire. Drone imagery revealed consistent spacing and organization matching known storage and tallying practices throughout the central Andes. Think of it as a three-dimensional ledger, a physical system for tracking goods, quantities, and commercial exchanges. Sediment studies showed many pits had signs of repeated use, not as graves or ritual chambers, but as places where materials were sorted or temporarily deposited during trade transactions. Microbotanical evidence revealed plants associated with regional exchange networks, confirming the pit's role in commerce. The study does not just offer a better explanation, it replaces the mystery entirely with evidence-based understanding. There is no need to invoke lost civilizations or extraterrestrials when the actual cultural context exists in the soil. For communities in the Pisco Valley centuries ago, the Band of Holes was working infrastructure, practical solutions to everyday needs of managing trade in a pre-monetary economy. Myth busted. The Band of Holes was not built by aliens, it was an indigenous Andean commercial accounting system. Myth number 6. Egyptians couldn't move pyramid stones. One of pseudo-archaeology's most common claims is that ancient Egyptians couldn't possibly have moved the hundreds of thousands of multi-ton blocks used in the Great Pyramid. The reasoning is that stones were too heavy, desert sand too soft, and without wheels or modern machinery, blocks would have sunk or would have been impossible to transport in a 20 to 30 year construction time frame. Therefore, the conclusion goes, the only explanation must be lost technology, alien intervention, or forgotten super civilizations. But a recent demonstration on Expedition Unknown provided yet another clear example of how Egyptians actually accomplished this using remarkably simple technology. The experiment, led by stonemason Frank Burgos, loaded a multi-ton limestone block onto a wooden sledge and pulled it across sand. No cranes, no engines, no mysterious technology. Then they applied the technique depicted right on Egyptian tomb walls, wetting the sand in front of the sledge. The results were dramatic. Dry sand created high friction and difficult progress, but wet sand, creating a thin moisture layer that causes grains to stick together rather than shift loosely, reduced friction dramatically. With a coordinated pulling team using ropes rhythmically, the multi-ton block moved steadily, relatively quickly and with far less effort than skeptics claim would be impossible. This experiment specifically addresses the limestone blocks comprising roughly 99% of the Great Pyramid's mass. The larger granite blocks used in some interior chambers require different techniques, including lever systems, internal ramps, and even more coordinated labor. But the fundamental point stands: Egyptians didn't need advanced technology to build the Great Pyramid. They needed sledges, ropes, organized workers, and a sophisticated understanding of materials science. The wet sand technique isn't speculation, it is documented on tomb walls. We have ancient quarry sites with tool marks. We have abandoned sledges and rope fragments. We have mathematical texts showing calculations for ramp angles and block placement. Myth busted. Ancient Egyptians absolutely could move pyramid stones using simple but effective technology. No lost civilizations required. Myth number 7. Poverty Point was a chiefdom. Poverty Point in northeast Louisiana is one of North America's most impressive ancient sites. Enormous concentric ridges and massive mounds were constructed around 3,500 years ago. For decades, archaeologists assumed its monumental scale required a hierarchical society, a chiefdom with permanent residents, ruling elites, and top-down organization. A 2025 study in the journal Southeastern Archaeology completely overturned that assumption. Researchers from Washington University presented evidence that Poverty Point was not a hierarchical center at all. Instead, it was likely a gathering place where mobile hunter-gatherers came together temporarily for exchange, rituals, social networking, and collective work, then dispersed. Features once cited as proof of hierarchy do not actually show long-term occupation. Earthworks may have been constructed during episodic gatherings, not under elite supervision. There is no strong evidence for the status differentiation seen in actual chiefdoms. The people who built Poverty Point did not need kings or chiefs to organize massive communal labor. They were highly connected hunter-gatherers who came together periodically to affirm relationships, trade goods, and participate in shared traditions, then return to their territories. This fundamentally changes how we understand social organization. Big does not automatically mean hierarchical. Myth busted. Poverty Point was not a chiefdom, it was a gathering site for sophisticated mobile hunter-gatherers who built monumental earthworks without kings. Myth number 8. The Maiden Castle Massacre. If you've watched documentaries about Iron Age Britain, you've heard the dramatic story of the Roman massacre at Maiden Castle. The narrative dates to the 1930s when archaeologist Mortimer Wheeler uncovered burials with apparent battle wounds and declared that Roman legions had stormed the hill fort in 43 CE, slaughtering defenders in a single bloody attack during Emperor Claudius's invasion. That interpretation stuck for nearly a century, appearing in textbooks, museums, and popular histories. A 2025 radiocarbon dating project by researchers at Bournemouth University demolished the entire story. By systematically dating each individual in Wheeler's war cemetery, they found the burials did not come from a single catastrophic event. Instead, people died over decades, from the late 1st century BCE well into the mid-1st century CE. The injuries were not the work of Roman legions. They represent sporadic violence, local conflicts, feuds, executions, possibly ritualized killings. By the time the Romans actually arrived, Maiden Castle was already largely abandoned as a defensive center. The famous massacre, the heroic last stand of the Britons, never happened. It was an interpretation shaped by 1930s assumptions that endured mainly because it made compelling theater. Myth busted. There was no Roman massacre at Maiden Castle. The burials represent decades of internal conflict before Rome arrived. Myth number 9. The claim a plague destroyed Akhetaten. One persistent explanation for why Pharaoh Akhenaten's city Akhetaten, modern Amarna, was abandoned is that a deadly plague swept through and killed much of the population. This appears in documentaries, popular books, and museum panels. A 2025 bioarchaeological study examined human remains from Amarna's cemeteries and found no evidence of a catastrophic epidemic. None of the signatures expected from a city-killing plague appeared. Age and death patterns look normal for a stressed but functioning community, not one suddenly struck by disease. Burials are orderly, trauma and disease markers are routine. The population profile does not show a demographic catastrophe. What really happened was far more complex. Political upheaval followed Akhenaten's death, economic disruption came as religious reforms were reversed, and there was an ideological backlash from the traditional priesthood. The city was deliberately abandoned for political and religious reasons, not because everyone died. Myth busted. Akhetaten was not abandoned due to plague. It was abandoned because of a deliberate political and religious reversal of Akhenaten's reforms. Myth number 10. Early medieval England was said to be isolated. One common misconception, especially in nationalist pseudo-history circles, is that early medieval England was completely isolated and genetically homogeneous, a closed island with no contact beyond northern Europe. A genetic study published in Antiquity in 2025 demonstrated how wrong this assumption is. Researchers analyzed ancient DNA from two individuals buried in early medieval cemeteries, one in Kent and one in Dorset. Both carried significant proportions of ancestry tracing to West Africa. These genetic signatures are genuinely ancient, carried by people who lived and died in England around the middle of the 7th century CE. The study's authors are careful to note this does not mean early England was cosmopolitan. These individuals were probably uncommon, but they are real, and there are almost certainly other examples waiting to be discovered. What this proves is that even during the so-called Anglo-Saxon period, long-distance movement of people into Britain occurred. Trade networks, military service, slavery, and religious pilgrimage all provided mechanisms for people from distant regions to end up in early medieval England. The myth of total isolation and homogeneity serves modern political narratives, but it does not match ancient reality. Myth busted. Early medieval England was not genetically isolated. People with West African ancestry lived and died in 7th century England. 10 myths. 10 popular narratives that shaped how millions of people understood ancient history, all destroyed by evidence in 2025. What is the common thread? Every myth persisted because it told a story people wanted to believe, whether that was dramatic catastrophes, mysterious lost civilizations, or validation of modern ideologies. And every myth collapsed when researchers actually examined evidence carefully using modern scientific methods instead of relying on old assumptions, speculation, or wishful thinking. This is why archaeology matters. This is why we cannot just accept compelling stories without demanding evidence. And this is why the scientific method, boring and methodical as it sometimes seems, gives us a more accurate picture of the ancient world than any amount of speculation. The past is stranger and more complex than the myths we tell about it, but it is also more interesting because it is real. What myth-busting from 2025 did we miss? What narrative do you think needs re-examination? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this valuable, we have created a free resource called Why Ancient History Matters, a guide explaining why understanding the past is crucial Even in our modern world, you will find the download link in the description. Share it with anyone who needs convincing that history is not just dates and dusty artifacts, it is the story of who we are and how we got here. Thanks for watching Discovery Journals. Keep questioning, keep investigating, and never accept myths when you can have evidence. We will see you in the next investigation.